I'm Tracy Randall, the owner and senior nutritionist at IBS Clinics.
Tracy, what is histamine intolerance?
So the term histamine intolerance is a bit misleading really because it kind of infers that you're intolerant to histamine. And in fact, this is misleading because histamine is actually a naturally occurring substance in the body. In fact, our immune system uses it to protect us from allergens such as pollen and also infections such as parasites. So a state of histamine intolerance is really when the body has become overwhelmed by having too much histamine.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's not a bad thing in itself. It's just that the body's slightly had a disproportionate response. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. What happens is that sometimes someone's immune system can mount an overblown, inappropriate level of reaction to some kind of trigger, such as a pollen or an infection like a parasite.
I think you touched on it, but could you tell me a bit more about what causes it?
So histamine intolerance or histamine overwhelm typically happens when an individual may be eating and drinking foods and beverages which are high in histamine. So typically foods such as aged meats, 28-day aged steak or smoked fish, or leftovers that have been hanging around for a day or two. They accumulate histamine in the fridge or when they're stored. And then there are also some beverages, particularly alcoholic beverages, like red wine, which are very high in histamine. So consumption of food and beverages, but equally the body produces histamine in response to external stimuli such as allergens and pollen and infections. And also if the body is inflamed for any reason, then inflammation can trigger histamine release as well. Additionally, if anyone's feeling stressed or feeling overwhelmed, then the body is provoked into making stress hormone, and in so doing it also causes mast cells to activate and release more histamine. So in a very short space of time, an individual that has had all of those types of stimuli, or at least some of them, will be in a situation where they have too much histamine and their body is unable to clear it. They may also have a situation where they have genetic mutations on key detoxification pathways in the body and therefore a reduced ability to break down and clear histamine from the body. And the result is complete overwhelm.
Okay, so those are the causes. What are the symptoms that people could expect?
The main symptoms of histamine intolerance are many and varied for the simple reason that so many of our body cells contain histamine receptors. So depending on which of the cell receptors are overwhelmed by histamine will determine what the symptoms are that the person gets. So they range everything from mental, emotional can be anxiety, neurological can be headaches and migraines, digestive conditions can be abdominal pain, cramping, diarrhea, and then the ones that you might expect. So things like in the skin, hives and itches and rashes, and then also kind of overwhelming mucus production. So runny nose, watering eyes, those kinds of symptoms.
God, so it's sort of amazing the breadth of symptoms that you could experience that would quite possibly be attributed incorrectly to other things that might be going on in your body, when actually the root cause is this histamine intolerance.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And that is often what happens. Often when I see clients in my clinic, they have been experiencing at least some of these symptoms for quite a long period of time, and they've been to see their GP, and the GP has tried various options or even made some good referrals, to see a neurologist or a gastroenterologist, and they've had things like a colonoscopy and endoscopy to see if they can, a reason for their loose motions, their diarrhea can be found, and has drawn a blank.
Tell me, is it diagnosed together with other conditions?
Yes, it can be. Histamine intolerance is often found alongside gut infections, in particular small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, and equally can be found when there is a parasitic infection going on, and even in cases of inflammatory bowel disease. And there is also a group of people who have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. And as part of their picture, they have what's called mast cell activation. And mast cells are the cells in the immune system that burst in response to stimulus, and they release various chemicals, including histamine.
And what could happen if it isn't addressed? What are the consequences of not taking it seriously?
What I've seen happen lots of times is that clients that come to see me have had symptoms associated with histamine overwhelm for quite a long period of their lives, and they have seen their GP on several occasions. But because of the fact that their symptoms were so varied and tended to cluster at different body parts, it meant that they were referred to various different specialists, so a gastroenterologist for the gut disorders, maybe a neurologist because of the migraines and the headaches, and maybe even a dermatologist because of the skin rashes. So, in an ideal scenario, a GP should be able to recognise a state of histamine overwhelm and understand that there is a bigger picture.
That being the case, what tests can be taken to identify histamine intolerance?
If histamine intolerance is suspected, then it's a good idea to kind of test the theory a bit more, because not everyone with low levels of diamine oxidase necessarily would still have histamine intolerance, although it's more likely. So what we tend to recommend is a period of trial of a diet which is deliberately low in histamine, and usually 2, 3 or even 4 weeks on the diet is all that is required for a person to be, to have a good idea whether histamine is part of their picture or not. If you think you might be suffering from histamine intolerance or would like to talk to us about any symptoms that you have, then please book either a consultation or a free 15-minute chat to discuss your health concerns further.